Hello, and welcome back to our conversation about Isaiah. I am Mother Nancy Springer, and I am here in Texas, and I am with my colleague and friend, the Reverend David Matthews, who is in, oh, David, that brain cell died.
Mississauga, Ontario,
Mississauga.
the outskirts
Yeah,
of
I was going to say
Toronto.
in Ontario, but I wanted to be more specific.
A little big,
Anyway,
yes.
so from across the continent, we share this conversation through the book of Isaiah. And today we continue on with Isaiah chapter 33.
So chapter 33, remember we're reading from the Common English Bible, but please use whatever version you've got in front of you. Doomed to the destroyer, left undestroyed. You traitor whom none have betrayed. When you have finished destroying, you will be destroyed. And when you have stopped betraying, they will betray you. Lord, show us your favor. We hope in you. Be our strength every morning, our salvation in times of distress. At the noise, people fled. On account of your roar, nations scattered. They gathered spoil like insects. They rushed upon it like a swarm of locusts. The Lord is exalted. He lives on high, filling Zion with justice and righteousness. He will provide security during a lifetime, a source of salvation, wisdom, and knowledge. Fear of the Lord will be Zion's treasure. But then those in Ariel cried out in the streets. Messengers of peace wept bitterly. The highways were deserted. Travelers left the road. The covenant was broken. Solemn pledges were rejected. No one cared for humanity. The land mourned. It wasted away. Lebanon was ashamed. It withered. Sharon became like a desert, and Bashan and Carmel were dropping their leaves. Now I will arise, says the Lord. Now I will exalt myself. Now I will stand tall. You conceive straw, give birth to stubble. Your breath is a fire that devours you. Peoples will be burned to lime, thorns cut up and set ablaze. You who are far away, hear what I have done, and you who are near, know my strength.
Sinners became terrified in Zion, trembling seized the godless. Who among us can live with the devouring fire? Who among us can live with the everlasting blaze? The one who walks righteously and speaks truthfully, who rejects the prophet from extortion, who waves away a bribe instead of grabbing it, who won't listen to bloody plots, and who won't contemplate doing something evil. He will live on the heights, fortresses in the cliffs will be his refuge. His food will be provided, his water guaranteed. When you gaze upon a king in his glamour and look at the surrounding land, in dismay you will think, where is the one who counts? Where is the one who weighs? Where is the one who counts towers? You will no longer see the defiant people, the people of speech too obscure to understand, who stammer in an incomprehensible language. Gaze upon Zion, our festival town. Your eyes will see Jerusalem, a carefree dwelling, a tent that is not packed up, whose stakes are never pulled up, whose ropes won't snap. The Lord's majesty will be there for us as a place of rivers, broad streams where no boat will go, no majestic ship will cross. The Lord is our judge. The Lord is our leader. The Lord is our king. He will deliver us. Your ropes are loosened. They can't hold the mast firmly. They can't spread the sail. Then abundant spoil will be divided, and the lame will see spoil. And no inhabitant will say, I'm sick. The people living there will be forgiven their sin. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Okay, so today for our study, we're going to do things a little bit differently. There's a lot jam-packed into this chapter. According to our Common English Bible, the title that the narrators or editors have put in is called Judgment and Hope for the Righteous. We're in a little bit of debate, discussion as to whether that is an appropriate title for this chapter, but we're going to discuss that come the end. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through verse by verse, section by section, to see what stands out to us, because there's a lot of really rich imagery here in this reading today. So Nancy, verse 1, doomed to the destroyer, left undestroyed. You traitor whom none have betrayed. When you have finished destroying, you will be destroyed. When you have stopped betraying, they will betray you. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so it is just a proclamation by the prophet Isaiah that right, even at this point, with everything we've read and talked through up through now, that even if you're still standing, you're not going to be, right? God is just going to wipe it all clean. And so those destroyers that think, hey, I survived, right, they're going to end up being destroyed, and the traitors will be betrayed. There will be no one left.
Yeah, because there was this sense in the day that God would bring about justice. And so if you were left standing, you might think to yourself, well, clearly God is on my side. I'm righteous, right? Where is your God? Or clearly your God is asleep or dead or whatever. My God is stronger. But here is the declaration of doom to the destroyer, left undestroyed. No. Don't think of yourself as righteous. Don't think of yourself as clearly in God's good books because you're left standing. It's sort of like the opposite of the book of Job, where Job has had all these horrible things happen to him, and his friends are all saying, clearly you've sinned. This is all your fault. Now just repent of your sin. And Job's like, I haven't sinned. What sin am I talking? Like, what are you talking about? So it's sort of the opposite of that, where instead Job is getting this punishment for something he hasn't done. Instead, you've got a bunch of people here who have done bad things, and yet they haven't received their punishment. So the victims are all saying, God, do something about this. Bring punishment, that we might know that you are just. And so it's the declaration of the prophecy about those who have yet been destroyed. And there's a part in the Bible, of course, that's chronologically after this, where it talks about that God is using the nations to bring justice or judgment upon Israel, but they themselves in turn will be judged. So it's sort of that idea where God is perhaps using this group, but in the end, they themselves will not go unscathed. So we hear
and that
this.
leads us into the next verse, right, where it's this prayer, this psalm of God, show us favor. We hope in you, be our strength every morning, our salvation in time of distress. So of those that are left, right, they don't think they've destroyed. They don't think they've been betrayed. They are hoping that God will see them as good and righteous.
And Nancy, thank you for likening it to the psalm there, because it really does have that psalm sound to it. The calling out for God to arise, and then the calling out for God's favor and help. So
at the noise, people fled, right?
Yeah, and we had talked about that previous to this. Is I get confused here about the account of who is talking and who is the people. So at the noise, the people fled on account of your roar. So Nancy, whose roar is this?
It's God's roar. And whether
God's
you think
roar.
you're righteous or a destroyer, if God roars, you're going to run, right? I mean, that sound is just unbearable. And so all the nations, all the people scatter and flee at God's roar.
So in contrast to your roar being God's roar, then we get to verse 4 and it says they gathered. So who is they?
All the people, right? They're just marching. They had marched through land like insects who devour everything. Right? You had brought up earlier what locusts do. Locusts come in, destroy everything, and move on. Right? And so that is who God is against, is these people that just come and take everything and destroy everything and keep going.
Yeah, and so this prophecy actually has a bit of a mirror prophecy in the book of Joel, where it talks about God will restore the years that the locusts have eaten. And in that same sense, it's being depicted here of the unrighteous, the nations, the people have basically taken the wealth, taken the a treasure of the righteous, of the people of Israel, and they themselves have gone. Now, to be clear, we're not declaring the nation of Israel to be the righteous people here either. God has
Right.
obviously brought judgment upon them themselves, but it's a depiction or the separation between the righteous and the unrighteous. So maybe we should say that the people or the unrighteous have taken that which belonged to the righteous.
Yes. And throughout this book, right, throughout Isaiah, he makes it clear that it is all the nations that God is either going to declare righteous or unrighteous.
Mm-hmm.
And so Israel doesn't hold any special place in that.
No, and
all
and
the nations
even
will get what's due.
and even when we talk about nations, that's probably too broad a term, because even within the nations, obviously, even within the groups, within the families, there are the righteous and the unrighteous. And we hear Jesus talk about that later on, where he talks about, I did not come to bring peace but the sword. The members of one's household will be one's own enemies. I'll divide, father against mother, and so on and so on. And so that sense of that God can divide and see the righteous from the unrighteous. And just because you are of the tribe of Abraham or of the tribe of whatever, it does not necessarily mean that you are judged righteous. And we'll get to how God judges that in a moment. So, okay, so the Lord is exalted. He lives on high, filling Zion with justice and righteousness. So God's pouring out his presence into this place, bringing justice and righteousness. And he will provide security during a lifetime, a source of salvation, wisdom, and knowledge. Fear of the Lord will be Zion's treasure. So again, God's going to, in this time of their brokenness, going to pour out his spirit to draw them all back to him. And again, we see the mirror prophecies through other prophetic books as well works. Talks about where, God will pour out his spirit in those days. And we often see those verses when we get closer to the time of Pentecost. But again, from the book of Joel. So again, very similar to what's being spoken about already.
Right, yeah. And so as we move through, right, those in Ariel, remember Ariel is like a nickname for Jerusalem. So those in Jerusalem are going to cry. The messengers of peace are going to weep because their work has not been heeded. Things will be deserted. The covenant is broken. Pledges rejected, and no one cared for humanity. Everybody was looking out for their own interests, right? Like the locusts, they're taking what they want and they're moving on. And so nobody's looking out for each other. All the relational covenants of the world have been shattered because it has become very individualized, like in the book of Judges, when everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes. And I think these verses speak so poignantly to us today, right? We have become such an individualistic culture, at least in the United States, right? I mean, in the middle of a pandemic, people start hoarding toilet paper to make sure they have enough. They don't worry about leaving enough for anybody else.
Yeah, of course, all that bad stuff that happened in America certainly did not happen in Canada. We are clearly the Tower of Righteousness up here. Nothing bad has ever happened.
Yeah. So, I think we just need to remember we are to be in relationship with each other, and relationship implies a covenant. We're both in this together to look out for each other.
Yeah. And if you are a Texan watching this, I assure you that was a joke on my behalf. That yes, whatever America is experiencing, I assure you the mirror image is happening here as well. It's this sense, like you said, of people doing what is right in their own eyes. And we see that not only in the book of Judges, but again, we see that multiple times as a theme through the Bible, because it's the same language, it's the same story that was happening prior to the flood, that in that moment that God then removes the unrighteous and starts again here with this person, with this righteous shoot or this hope of Noah. And yet even in seeing Noah and what Noah consequently does afterwards, God knows that humanity that he hasn't wiped out sin from humanity, but he is
Yeah.
starting again here. And
Yeah.
so when we get
Yeah.
to verse 9, the land mourned, it wasted away, Lebanon was ashamed, it withered, Sharon became like a desert, and Bashan and Carmel were dropping their leaves. So the land has become dead, basically. Even these, Nancy, as we were talking about this previously, you had made mention that these places that were just named were like truly fruitful and lively. It would be like if Florida suddenly became a desert, and this sense of it just suddenly stopped raining and everything died. All the green suddenly became brown. It's such a, to the audience listening to this, it would have been such an bizarre statement saying that can't happen. But that's what he's saying is that, and similarly before the flood, people would have said, well, that can't happen either. And similarly before the time of where God brings judgment again and again in the Bible, people would have said, well, that can't happen. Before each of them, there would have been a group of people
Yeah.
who said that. And so
Yeah.
here we see God saying, this is what will happen. It will be like this. But in each of those situations, God does bring new life. So with Noah, through the time of Judges, God always brought up a judge to bring the people out of that time of oppression. And again, God saved, to, of course, where we see the ultimate story of this in Jesus himself, where Jesus does go to the ultimate desert. Jesus goes to the grave itself, where there is no life. And then, spoiler alert, that's not the end of the story. Up from the grave, he rises again, and new life appears. So it's that new life out of death motif we see again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, Nancy, what is special then about verse 10? And how does
Wow.
that relate
So
to what we just said about the grave and rising again?
yeah, and that's, there is no one left, no thing left, not even the rocks and the trees, right, to cry out and exalt God. So God has to stand up and exalt himself. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The world is just so very broken, all of creation,
Mm-hmm.
right? That nothing is singing out God's praises. And so God does that himself.
And that's staggering, because that was our original created purpose. And
right.
as
Yeah.
Jesus says, when the Pharisees are telling him to get his disciples to shut up about saying who he is, he says, even if I do, the rocks will cry out.
Yeah.
And so this is nature's created purpose to exalt God. And yet in verse 10, no one is exalting God. God exalts himself. Yeah. And he
Total,
says,
total destruction of all of creation, right? And so people just cannot do anything that they were created to do, right? The imagery here of straw and giving birth to stubble, back to the days of Moses and being captive in Egypt, right? When they had to then get their own straw to make the bricks. They can't even get straw now. They get nothing, right? They are so unproductive in doing what they were created to do, which is to glorify God, that their own breath, right, devours them. And at creation, God breathed his breath into us, and that is what gave us life. And
mm-hmm.
so this is the exact, complete, utter opposite of that our own breath destroys us after
Yeah.
God
And so
breathes into us and gives us life.
we're seeing the opposite then of our created purpose, these people living
Mm-hmm.
out through basically speaking or bringing about death through their own mouth to each other, which, as you had
Yeah.
mentioned with Moses a moment ago, with the straw and giving birth to stubble there, that same imagery, when God spoke to Moses through the burning bush, the fire didn't devour the bush. The
No.
fire, the presence of God, didn't devour or destroy. In fact, the
Yeah.
bush simply stayed there, and that's what caught Moses' attention. And yet the people continue to destroy each other. So they're walking out in the exact opposite purpose that they were created for, and that God sets as the example for them.
Yeah. And so the only strength that will remain is God's, right? You who are far away, hear what I've done. You who are near, know my strength.
Yeah, and
And
that
so
that
God
goes
has,
back to the roar, right? Like that's a
yeah,
terrifying statement.
yeah, it is. It is. And so the sinners became terrified, right? Very next thing. And they tremble and they ask these questions: who among us can live? Um, and the prophet Isaiah gives them the answer to that. To live, you must walk righteously and speak truthfully and reject profit, right? From exhortation. Don't bribe, don't be a part of bloody plots, don't contemplate evil. And so there's their answer, right? It's almost as if he's like, I've been telling you this all along. Here it is summed up in just a few words. Um, so that this is who, and it harkens back to, right, the previous chapter 32, where we are given this picture of the golden age, the new age that Jesus says will come, the new heaven, the new earth that God himself will bring about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So when you talk about that, then we get to jumping down and just perhaps a little bit, just to verse 17, right? Connects with that, right? When you gaze upon a king in his glamour and look at the surrounding land, in dismay you will think, right? So even the glamour of the earthly king is nothing, right? In dismay you will think, where's the one who counts? Where's the one who weighs? Where's the one who counts towers? Here it's, the glamour of the earthly king is nothing.
Right. Yeah. And so that imagery of the tower moving into verse 19, right? You'll no longer see the defiant people, the people of speech too obscure, who stammer and incompetent. So, this brings about two images: the Tower of Babel, when God gave people different languages that caused them to scatter across the earth because they could not understand each other. And that imagery being redeemed through Pentecost, where they were all given language but could still understand. It wasn't incomprehensible. And so in the new Jerusalem and the new heaven and the new earth, right, we may still all have different languages. We don't know what that's going to look like, but we will understand each other and we will understand God. We'll have the eyes to see and the ears to hear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So at this time, with that sense of unity here, it says, gaze up to Zion, our festival town. Your eyes will see Jerusalem, a carefree dwelling. So this is now obviously a new city because the old one has been abandoned, deserted, destroyed. There's nothing there, but God has brought new life to it. So then we see a tent that is not packed up, whose stakes are never pilled up, whose ropes won't snap. So this is immediately like the attention is drawn back to the Israelites in the desert, right? The tents, the straps. This is all language of a nomadic people. And so at the time when Israel, of course, was nomadic, was the time when they were following God, when it was an intimate time with Moses, and God's presence was there in the midst of them, and they were following him through the desert. So here, this is God, God with us, God incarnate, God here present. And so it says then, the Lord's majesty will be there for us, as a place of rivers, broad streams, where no boat will go, no majestic ship will cross. The Lord is our judge. He is our leader. He is our king. So, we've had judges, right? We've had judges. They weren't so good. They all failed us. They got us to a point, didn't get us that much further. We've had leaders. Leaders have been good, but they haven't got us that far. They haven't got it wherever. Like the leader, of course, who stands out most is, of course, Moses, right? He led the people, but did Moses lead the people into the promised land? No, he did not.
No.
Did he himself get into the promised land? No, he did not.
Nope.
So the Lord, though, will do better. And then the Lord is our king. And with, we know the story of the kings, David being the greatest. Did David himself, was he perfect? No. He was not the one who got to build the temple because his hands were covered in blood. He led the people through civil wars because of his own sin. So again and again, we see these leaders fall short, but God is now here present to fulfill the promises and the hope.
Yeah.
So Nancy, then specifically then it says, he will deliver us. So God is going to be the one to do it. Now we come to these strange verses. Verse 23. Help me to understand this.
We don't really know what to do with this. So these are words that would have been understood to reference pirates and piracy on the ocean, but yet Jerusalem's nowhere near the ocean. It doesn't even have a river big enough for a big boat. So not really sure what to do with this imagery that we have, except that things won't be plundered, things won't be taken from us, we won't be defeated. We will be God's people. He has delivered us, right? Even the lame will have part of the treasure of the kingdom, right? So we were told in the beginning of the chapter that the fear of the Lord will be Zion's treasure. Mm-hmm. So even the lame will partake of that. So, the lowest rank in society then. And no one will say they're sick, and everyone will be forgiven, right? So it's equal footing, equal status. No one has more power. No one has the ability to take from another. We are all living as God's people under God's rule.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So under God's rule, we have this new kingdom, this new life, this freedom. And this going on through verse 24, no inhabitant will say, I'm sick, and the people living there will be forgiven their sin. So it's this fullness of God's presence here will even push back the brokenness of the original sin of humanity, which brought sickness and brought death, and the people will be forgiven. So God is bringing new life, and not only is he bringing new life, he is forgiving what brought death into the world. So he's removing that thing as well.
Right.
So Nancy, we said at the beginning, the Common English Bible entitles this Judgment and Hope for the Righteous. Do you think that's a fair title, or is there anything else that you would perhaps emphasize or retitle this?
I think it's pretty fair, right? So the righteous hope that they are known as to be righteous, and that God's judgment will take care of those who are unrighteous. And so I think it says in the end, right, that God restores the righteousness, not through our own human efforts, but through God's efforts. And that all are judged accordingly, and all are evened out and leveled, so that there's a level playing field of everyone being cared for, which is the ultimate righteousness, right? That everybody has what they need.
Yeah, everybody has life. And God, and I don't mean life as in, I'm living in squalor or something like that, but I mean like fullness of life. They are living into their created purpose. And that is incredible.
To glorify and exalt God. And when we say to God, you are our judge, our leader, our king, that is what we are doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As I look at this title, Judgment and Hope for the Righteous, it's a good title. It explains what's going on. To me, it doesn't focus enough just on God. Like, I'd almost just want to retitle it, God is coming. And, that like that sort of explains, right?
In his righteousness, right?
Yeah. He's coming, and he ain't messing around, folks.
Right. He's going to roar at all of us.
Yeah. And there are two, we talked about this prior, there are two types of people who stand firm when God roars. And it's either those who are assured in God, who know their place in him, and he has spoken to them, and they know they know their identity in him. Even then, their knees should shake a bit. And then the other people are the fools. Like the fools to think this roar doesn't pertain to them or whatever else. Those are the two types of people who stand firm in God's presence when he roars.
Yeah.
Well, Nancy, is there anything we've missed that you want to highlight or share with people today?
I think we've covered it. That was a fun walkthrough. I like that.
Yeah, it was good. This chapter really lent itself to be able to walk through verse by verse. And because there was just so much imagery and context tied into each verse, different ways it connected with the Bible and its narratives.
Yeah.
This was wonderful.
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay. Well, folks, God bless you. We really enjoy joining us for our Bible study today. We hope that you drew something from this and are able to connect with God in a new way or a deeper way. And so God bless, and we look forward to being able to do this again soon.
All right. See y'all next time. Bye.